But what I want to talk about now is taking a digital impression. I want to talk about taking a digital impression and taking a digital bite. One of the things we do not want to do is take a digital impression and an analog bite. It actually makes more work for the entire process. See, the streamlining of all of this and the accuracy and everything working together is going to be exemplified by utilizing both a digital impression technique and a digital bite registration. And I'll explain all this to you. Today we're going to be using a 3-shape trios. It's really kind of a neat little camera that we've got. It actually takes 3D pictures and stitches them together. And we're going to use that on a Typodon. And the reason we use a Typodon instead of a patient for this digital representation is I want to be able to show you how to manipulate the wand a little bit so you can pick up all those nooks and crannies. Because just like the analog impression, I've got to get inside every little interdental, interpapillary area and record all that. I've got to make sure that we get all the information there. Why? Because this is a highly precise type of device that fits very accurately and very well, and it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. If I take a inaccurate impression, analog, I can have some misfits and I'll have some irregularities that I don't want to have and some inconsistencies. The same thing can be true with a digital impression. Just because it's digital doesn't mean it's going to be better or more accurate. I still have to make sure I capture all that detail. We'll walk through that in a second when we do it. And we'll use a traditional George gauge. We'll use a George gauge with nothing on it at all, and then we'll use a George gauge with impression material. And the challenges we'll have will be some of the software systems, some of the digital impression taking intraoral scanners are not going to do very well at picking up impression material. Now the 3-shape trios does a nice job. As long as you don't goop too much material up and hide the teeth, it'll take a perfectly accurate digital bite record, even in protrusion, even in open VOD, with bite registration material in there, as long as you don't cover the teeth. You might have to cant up a little bit and pick up some soft tissue, cant down and pick up some soft tissue, but it'll stitch them all together for you nicely. And we'll walk through that as well. So let's take a look at some of the idiosyncrasies and some of the techniques that are associated with the protocol for taking an exquisite digital impression. Now, before we actually start taking the digital impression, I want to go over a couple of tips and tricks that I think you'll find useful, probably useful with just about any system. First, of course, you'd want to have a dry environment as you can. Now, it doesn't have to be bone dry, but you just don't want bubbles of saliva floating around because you'll actually take a picture of bubbles of saliva. You'll also want to start in the back in the molar region, and usually most scan protocols will have you start in one molar region, scan around the arch to the other molar region, roll to the lingual, record the lingual, come back out, do the buccal up to the anterior, and then in this case you'll remove the 3-shape trios, go back into the arch, into the posterior on that other side, and bring that forward too. And every once in a while when you're in the anterior, you'll just kind of do a little rocking motion to pick up the buccal, transition across the incisors and the lingual. There just isn't much surface area there, so in the posteriors, you'll have a nice occlusal surface that helps stitch parts and pieces together. We don't have that in the anterior. So when you're in the anteriors, upper and lower, you'll want to roll it a little bit to just remind the 3D stitching mechanism that there's a buccal, a lingual, and they're joined together at the incisal. You'll want to move smoothly, slowly, just like my golf swing. No, not like my golf swing. My golf swing is fast and furious. Slow and smooth wins the day. You try not to pick up any lips or cheeks or tongue. The shape of most of the tips today, this is autoclavable, of course. It's heated so that you don't have to worry about it fogging up in the mirror. You just got to make sure it's clean. You got to make sure it's calibrated in the morning, everything like that. But when you move that around, it'll actually work to deflect the cheeks and the tongue. You can use a hand mirror, whatever you need to do. Most of the time, the system will give you some sort of feedback. Usually it's an auditory sound. In this case, you're going to hear some clicking on the screen, and the clicking is telling me that it's picturing up images. And if I turn it away from the teeth, or I'm recording something I've already recorded, I'm in an area that's foreign to it, it'll stop clicking. If you miss an area, if you disconnect from an area, you simply have to go back. And then when you're ready to do the bite, we'll talk about doing the bite in the posterior and just coming forward along the occlusal ledge. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Those should help make it a little bit easier to capture some of those little interdental areas. Now, whichever system you're using, there's going to be an on and off mechanism, and as we mentioned earlier, there'll be some sort of an auditory mechanism. In the case of the trios, you're going to hear some clicking. So for this one, it's just a quick on and off of the trigger, and the software over here on the screen is going to remind me of what I'm supposed to be shooting. In this case, it's asked me to start with the lower arch, so I'll demonstrate that rather quickly. Then we'll shoot the upper arch, and then we'll talk about taking a bite. So if I turn this on with one click, you hear the clicking starting. That means it's picked it up. I'll start to come forward. When I get to this anterior region, I'll roll in a little bit. I'll roll out a little bit to connect those incisal edges we talked about. I'll do the same thing on the left incisor area, and then I'll continue on back into the posterior. Now I'm watching the teeth, and I'm going to roll into the lingual, and I'll keep it horizontal coming along there. When I get to this bicuspid region, I'll roll it just a little bit so that I can pick up those interdental areas. And when I get to the anterior, I'll again roll it a little bit, because that's how it connects the dots. Bicuspids, a little rolling, so I can picture those areas nicely. And then on into the posterior. Back across the occlusal, down onto the buccal, and I'll follow the buccal surface, connecting those dots. You hear the clicking continuing. I'll follow the arch form, and again when I get to the anterior here, I'll roll that in, and then I'm going to pull out. I'll go back into the remainder of the posterior here, starting on the occlusal. When I hear the clicking start, I'll know that I'm ready to roll back out onto the buccal, and I'll follow the arch form again, making sure I'm catching those interproximal areas. I'll come to the anterior, I'll roll up a little bit again, and I'll be done. So in this example, I'm going to record the bite with the George gauge in place with no polyvinyl siloxane bite registration material. So I simply turn the computer has queued me up to take the bite registration. It's asked me to take 2 bites, one on the right and one on the left. So I'll start with the bite on the right first. When you hear that lovely music back there, that's a sign that it's recorded the bite on the right side. I'll click on bite number 2 here. And I'll take the scanner. And I'll just record some of the upper and the lower. You can see that I'm picking up a little soft tissue. It plays me that little music, and it now has all the information it needs for both sides to be able to put that and stitch the upper and lower arch together with that protrusive bite relationship. Now sort of remember where the upper and lowers are right there, and we'll take a look at how that looks on the screen in just a second. By clicking on this Analyze button up here, it simply removes the bite registration material or the bite registration mechanics and allows you to see the upper and lower arch in the position that they're in, which is similar to what we saw on the models. Works really nicely. Now let's do one with a little bit of impression material or bite registration paste in there. Now, one of the things that's kind of neat about the 3Shape Trio scanner is it does not mind this little bit of bite registration material in there. We've got some futar in there, futar fast set, but as long as I can see tooth and tissue, there's enough information for the scanner to stitch those pieces together. So this side looks great. However, when I rotate this around and we look over here, I may have intentionally put a little bit too much futar. Has that ever happened to you? And so what I'd like to do here is I'm going to remove this. I'm going to open this bite up carefully. I'll take the George gauge out, and I'm simply going to trim away some of this excess material just like you would do anywhere. Just a little bit of a Bard Parker, a little trim here, a little trim there. We've still got plenty of bite registration mojo going on in there, but now I can put this down, close the patient in, and now I can pick up tooth and stitch everything together. So let's go ahead and see if we can capture the bite with that material in place. You hear that magic music? That means we've got the bite recorded on that side. Now we simply rotate over here and switch to the other side as soon as it's finished with the acquisition. We'll just roll this across the buccal, pick up some of the lower teeth, some of the soft tissue as well. And you hear that magic music, means we've got the bite captured. Now I simply click on Analyze Again. It saves the case and brings it all back together without the bite registration material or the George gauge and fork in place. And we've got all that captured just like we had here on the models. Really pretty neat the way it erases all that material. Pretty cool. One of the other options, of course, is the 3D digital bite fork that we have here at ProSomnus. If we were to take this fork and put a little bit of material here in the posterior regions, a little bit up here in the anterior region as well, and then simply position that in the arch, the patient would have a nice place to close to and 3 nice little pads of material for their teeth to rest on. So that if you had a patient who had a little bit of a quivering jaw, or if you were using a different type of scanner that wasn't able to erase all the material, you'd like to leave these areas here on the side a little bit more open and scannable. That would give you that kind of opportunity. So as you can see, there's an awful lot of precision, accuracy, and engineering that goes into the making, the manufacturing, and the design of the types of ProSomnus devices we're talking about. Accuracy in terms of impressions, doesn't matter whether it's analog or digital, we need to have exquisite types of impressions. And then the bite registration, now we've got 2 directions to go in, don't we? We can use analog for analog impressions and a digital bite registration, a couple different types, for a digital type of impression. What we don't want to do is crisscross the 2 because otherwise, it's going to make more steps, more work, and probably delay the case from getting back. If I've got a digital impression and I take a digital bite registration, and then I simply click on digital@prosomnus.com, I can then upload my STL files that I took with my intraoral scanner and either a JPEG or a PDF of the prescription form that I filled out. That's going to initiate and help ProSomnus receive the case earlier and get started right away. It's really a neat innovation to be able to have a full digital pathway like this from start to finish. It's kind of neat, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you find it a little bit helpful for you in terms of your future planning and your future work. Thanks a lot.